This video is the beginnings of preparing to work on a cross-stitch kit. You can get them in a variety of different ways or make up your own. I'm just going to show you two of the different ways you can purchase them. One is the complete kit, which gives you your thread, your fabric, needle palette, needle, and instructions. In it you would get your thread, which in this case has some metallics, some wool, along with your embroidery floss, and your palettes. So this is where you would attach your threads to. So you know this thread is the A symbol, this is the B symbol, this is the number 2. So as you're working on your chart, you know which thread you're going to be using next. It also gives you your chart, which shows you how to prepare your fabric, how to prepare your threads, along with needles, and then of course on the inside, the actual chart itself. It's fairly good size. And then your fabric also. The other way to get them is just a pattern alone, and on it shows you what size fabric to get. This one is done on an even weave, which is a 25 count, so it's 25 stitches to an inch, which is kind of small for me. I'd rather do it on something larger, so I divide that number in half, which would be a 13. So I would do it either on 14 count or a 16 count, personal preference. It's entirely up to you. It provides you with the symbols and the embroidery floss colors that you need, along with the actual chart. So everything is included but your fabric and your thread. So, and then after you decide on your fabric, you decide on which way you want to do it. Now you got to decide on your fabric if you need to get your own. This is a piece of 11 count. If you look at it between the two straight pins, that's 1 inch, and there's 11 stitches within that 1 inch. So the 11 stitches horizontally and 11 stitches vertically would make up 1 square inch. The next size down would be 14 count. As you can tell here, there's definitely more stitches in the 14 than there is in the 11. From 14 you go down to 16, and as you can see there's even more stitches, and then of course there's also 18, which is very small and not what I prefer to work on. So then you would have to decide on your needle for it if you have to provide your own needle. They come in a variety of sizes. There's like these, which are really large, which are probably too big to use, but I'll show an example with one. You'd probably wind up using 24 or 26, maybe a 22. So let's start with a 18. As you can see, the eye, what's the best way to do it, is large, which is easy to thread. Of course, the needle itself is large. And if you go to put it through one of the holes, it has resistance, and you want to be able to put it through your work with the thread and not have a lot of resistance. Or when you pull it out, make a hole, because every time you make a hole next to each one, it makes each of your little squares smaller and tighter, and it just doesn't look as nice, and it just gives you a kind of a wonky finish. So say you go down to a 24 needle. You put your 24 in. It goes in very easy, and it really doesn't change your hole size. I personally like to use the 26, which is even tinier still. It's personal preference. You use the smallest needle you can use and keep your work smooth. See, this one just almost falls through. From there, you want to prepare your actual fabric, because if you look at the fabric, it's got raw edges, and as you fuss with it, they unravel, and the more they unravel, the smaller and smaller your piece becomes. When you first start using it, it's a fairly stiff piece of fabric because of the sizing. Once you've manipulated and used it and cross-stitched on it, it gets very soft and wimpy, and that also helps get these pieces to pull loose. So what I do is fold it on a 1/4 inch and top stitch it. That way it doesn't come unraveled. It stays nice and tight, and see here it's unraveling. Or you can do a zigzag stitch if you like to do a zigzag and not fold it over. But then you've got these raw fibers, and sometimes that affects your thread as you go in and out. It kind of catches. I like to do the zigzag, and then I like to fold it over 1/4 inch and top stitch it, so I make sure mine is double done. In some pieces of fabric, it already has a finished edge, so you don't have to do anything to the finished edge. Just like this one, I did a zigzag on it. Just the zigzag, I didn't fold it over. And after you do that, then we want to get into this grid. I'll talk about that next. Because if you look at the pattern pieces, you notice there is these darker lines. Each one of these darker lines represents a 10 stitch by 10 stitch square. You could use this chart for 11 count, 14 count, 16 count. It doesn't matter, because no matter what count you have, they all can work off of a 10 by 10 square. There is threads that they suggest. It's a nylon thread which you can weave or sew through into your 10 stitch by 10 stitch grid and then pull it out once your work is done. I haven't been able to find any at any craft store, but you can get it from Hirschner's. It's a great book. It has all kinds of accessories and patterns and helpful hints. I prefer to do it the easier way. I get a water-soluble pen from any craft store, Walmart, it doesn't matter. And you would just draw your lines every 10 stitches, and you make your own grid. The good part about being water-soluble, water will actually make it go away if I can get enough water here. It'll actually fade away with the use of water, or if you let it set within a year's time, it's going to fade away anyway. But you want to go ahead and get a grid started. Now, the patterns themselves tell you, most of the time, they like you to start in the upper left-hand corner and work your way down or work your way across, which is perfectly fine. Some say start in the dead center and work your way out. That's also perfectly fine. I'm right-handed, and I seem to like to start over here personally myself, so I will go down this way when I'm doing my pattern. That's just personal preference. Any way is just fine. But that's kind of a way to get started. Now, another thing I'd like to show you is the pattern itself, as you can see, is quite small. It's kind of hard to see which symbols are which, especially if you need reading glasses. So what I like to do is take my actual pattern. This is one of the pattern pieces. I photocopy the page. I do not like to use any of my originals, because if I make a mistake, I don't have anything to remake it with. So I photocopy, set my original aside, cut them into quarters. So now I have 4 pieces. This is page 33A, 33B, 33C, and 33D. So as I'm working, I know I have to do all 4 of these to complete this one whole page. So if you enlarge it to 180 to 190%, as you can see, it's a lot easier to read. That's the reason I like to do it. And then, since I mark them with the numbers, like here, this is page 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and then since my pattern goes all the way across to page 6, so mine goes this way, number-wise. But I like to work from this way down. So the first one I did was 6A, then I did 6B, and then 12A and 12B, and I highlighted them off as I did each quadrant. And then I come up and I did 5B and 5D and went down. Then I did 5A, 5C, and went down. As you can see, that's as far as I've gotten on my pattern at this point. The one I'm working on is this one, which is 17 by 25. Every single piece of fabric is cross-stitched over. You don't have to cross-stitch over every stitch. It just depends on what the pattern says. Mine is 252,000 stitches, so this is going to take me a good 2 years to do. So the next thing I like to show you is actually that I'm working on it. See, there's my peacock. And I went ahead and got this piece ready. They suggest you stay with much as you can within your square. Maybe you come down a couple of stitches here, a couple of stitches there, because you have the thread on your needle and there's only one left. So you would do that. But I did this on purpose. I went kind of all over the place, and which is fine. But if you have to put it down for a week or a month because of a family issue, now how do you know where to start again? So if you get out this page and you're looking at it, let me get the bigger one. Oh, here it is. There's all your designs, but now where did I leave off? Is this that curve where I left off, or maybe the heart is the curve? It's hard to remember, especially when you have 120 colors you're working out of. So what I do is I highlight them as I go. You can use red, yellow, blue, green, it doesn't matter, but as you can see here, this curve that I was looking at is symbol A for the first half, then the double box. So if I look on my pattern, there's where symbol A is, and it works around this way. If I wanted to start back over here, I come back to my pattern, and it's right there. There's the square, and there's the next square, and then the rest of symbols follow in place. So that's just a way to keep track of what you're doing, enlarge your pattern to make it easier to see, and always protect your original. So if you ever have to recopy it, you've got it to work off of. The next video is going to be on threading needles and starting and stopping your stitches and additional preparing of your work.